All right, welcome to the Response Roadmap, 5 steps to navigating tough conversations with your loved one with calm, confidence, and connection. My name is Danny Gillity, the Executive Director at the Eating Disorder Foundation, and I'm delighted to be here with you all tonight. Today's workshop is brought to you in collaboration with EDF and Bryn. I would like to take a moment to share a few words about the Eating Disorder Foundation. We are a nonprofit that was founded in 2003 with a mission to be an effective resource in the prevention and elimination of eating disorders through free and accessible education, support, and advocacy. We are a Denver-based organization that is now serving individuals and families both nationally and internationally. As I mentioned, if you have questions for our presenter, I invite you to use the chat feature to communicate with me directly throughout the workshop. The chat is kept confidential and will come to me directly, and we'll save a few minutes at the end for Q&A, and I will moderate those questions with Bryn. We will not be sharing the PowerPoint. However, we are recording tonight, and we'll send the recording as soon as possible. And now I would like to introduce our speaker, Bryn Miller. Bryn is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Colorado, a certified eating disorder specialist and supervisor, and a certified advanced therapist in emotion-focused family therapy. She is also the secretary of the Denver Metro IADIP chapter and runs the monthly Connection Caregiver Skills through the Eating Disorder Foundation. With nearly a decade working with adolescents and young adults with eating disorders alongside their parents and caregivers at every level of care, Bryn is passionate about supporting both individuals and their support teams to explore and heal their relationships with food and their bodies. Bryn approaches her work both with individuals and their loved ones with the goal of whole family healing. In a service of the mission to better support caregivers and inspired by EFFT, Bryn Miller founded Parent Coaching and developed her signature 5-step parent coaching program, the Response Roadmap. Through live groups and her on-demand course, Bryn empowers parents to access their sense of calm and confidence to better connect to their children and the parents they want to be, regardless of the struggles. When Bryn is not working, she is writing, meditating, embarrassing herself in a hip hop class, and trying, largely unsuccessfully, to keep up with her own 2 small children. So welcome, Bryn, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Danny. I so appreciate that. And hello to everyone. I am so grateful for you all being here and really appreciative of the time and energy that it takes to be here, especially live and in person. So wonderful to see your faces. So glad to be here. And we'll go ahead and jump right in. I know that it is Bryn Miller Parent Coaching. The talk today is really designed to be inclusive of any caregivers supporting any loved ones. So whether you're a parent, a spouse, a sibling, a grandparent, a provider, anyone that's here on behalf of a loved one that's struggling, you are in the right place, just so you know. So let's get into it. So just a big thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you to Lydia, thank you to Danny, and of course the Eating Disorder Foundation, which I am just so incredibly passionate about supporting the work that you guys do, and the resources that you bring to this community is just invaluable. And also a big thank you to the founders and pioneers of emotion-focused family therapy. Today, I'm going to walk you through something called the Response Roadmap, which is my signature 5 steps of supporting parents and caregivers, but it's really underpinned and informed by emotion-focused family therapy. So I want to give them a big shout out. And then most of all, thank you all for being here. Again, with everything that you have going on, to find the time, it's really, really valuable. So thank you so much, and it means a lot. So who am I? My name is Bryn Miller. I come to you as a certified eating disorder specialist and supervisor with, like Danny said, about a decade of experience working just with eating disorders. I'm also an expert in caregiver support and skills, and I have an advanced certification in emotion-focused family therapy. I'm one of 10 advanced EFFT therapists in the United States here. And I am also a deeply imperfect parent myself. And I say that because anytime I'm talking to a set of caregivers, about their loved ones and their loved ones' struggles, I know we are in an incredibly vulnerable space. And so I want you to know that I am in it with you. I come to you with a ton of admiration and respect for the work that you're doing, supporting your loved ones, and come with a great deal of humility around caregiving. It is the hardest thing that you can do. And so I just want you to know that I come and am humbly walking beside you as we move through these steps today. So just a quick kind of way of orienting you to what to expect today. My goal is that you leave here today with skills and tools that you can start using immediately, like as soon as you get out of this workshop. And so in order to do that, one of the ways that this can be really effective is to make it interactive. So if you've ever seen a talk that I've done, I think this is my third one with EDF in the past couple of years. I love to make these skills really actionable, really concrete. So if you don't have a pen and paper, take a second, go grab something. Writing this down as we move through can be really helpful in terms of it kind of really solidifying those skills for you. So really encourage you to do that. Also want you to really honor where you are today. Everyone is going to be coming to this, on the heels of a different day with different bandwidth, with different levels of wanting to kind of jump in, so to speak. So really honor where you are and what you need to get out of this today. And know that this is just a taste. So if you want a deep dive, if you want more resources, I'm going to make sure I cover that at the end for you guys. And then, like Danny said, if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll save them for the FAQ at the end. So I would love if you would all just take a moment and take a deep breath with me, and give yourself permission to kind of leave the day and wherever you're coming from on the other side of the door. Really allow yourself to be here and in this space and have this time. I think as caregivers, we often can go through the whole day and realize we haven't really taken a deep breath or had a moment. So I'm going to stop talking and give you guys a few seconds. And I really invite you to just take a few deep breaths and let yourself be here in this space right now. Awesome. So today in this talk and in this work, we focus on you, the caregiver. Why do we do that? Why is it so important to get skills and tools in your toolbox when it's your loved one that's suffering? So one of the reasons is because you have a huge influence on your loved one. And I know sometimes, depending on what the journey has been, it can feel like that's not the case. And it can feel like you feel helpless sometimes. And so sometimes that takes a little bit of a leap of faith to really get back to a place where you believe that you can have a huge influence on your loved one. We know from a lot of research, from a lot of data, from what we know from interpersonal neurobiology, that when we have a connection with someone, when we have an attachment with someone, that we have a huge impact on the way they're able to regulate their emotions and what they're going through. So you have a huge influence, which is why we like to get these tools into the hands of caregivers. Another reason that we focus on the caregiver in a talk like this is because you're in charge of you. You have control and agency over what you do. We don't always have that over our loved one. Obviously, if you could love them enough that they weren't struggling anymore, none of you would be here right now. And so I really want you to kind of shift the focus off of, this is what my loved one needs to be doing, and they should be doing this and should be doing that. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but in terms of this hour, really shifting to what can I do? What is in my control that I can start doing even tonight that can help shift things? And then lastly, because you care more than anyone else on earth, that when we pull in the caregivers, when we pull in the support team, we are leveraging a superpower. And so I always say that working with just the individual and not the people in their life that care about them is like giving someone half the amount of medicine that they need and they deserve. And so you really can have such a massive impact, especially when we're leveraging that love that you have for them. So in emotion-focused family therapy, or EFFT, as we call it, We believe that caregivers are a crucial part of any support team. And we've got really good research and data to back up that when caregivers get support and skills, that their loved ones are better off. And we see this in a lot of different ways. We see reduced hospital stays, we see reduced behaviors, we see shorter stays in the NICU for babies when their parents and caregivers are given skills to support them. So really, really interesting research that underpins this. And also, you know, my 10 years of work would also be a testament to this. And at the same time, being a caregiver, having that impact and influence can be really activating. So when you try and help your loved one, your own feelings are likely to get activated in this, especially if you're in a moment with your loved one when you feel like nothing you're trying is working. It's so frustrating. It's so scary. It's so hard. And so you have this sense, you love them so much, you know you could help, otherwise you wouldn't be here with me right now. But how? What does that look like? How do I actually move forward with that? How do I operationalize that, right? Well, know that you are in good company. You are walking alongside hundreds of parents and caregivers that I have supported that have asked these same questions and struggled with these same things, which is really the birthplace of what we're going to talk about today. So I want you to take a moment and think of a challenging situation. So a current struggle that you're having with your loved one. And I think the more specific you can get, the more it'll help us kind of generalize when you go to use these skills. But just really pick an example to ground yourself in today. So this might be my loved one isn't answering my phone calls, or they won't go to their therapy appointments, or they're having trouble, you know, going to work in the morning, or they can't get themselves to school, you know, whatever it is, just a situation that's coming up for you, that's really giving you pause, really hard for you to figure out how to move forward. And for those of you I can see, if you can, you know, give me a thumbs up if you've got something in mind, if you don't mind, or you can just throw a thumbs up. Awesome. I see one there. Thank you. I see another one. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Got a little, oh, awesome. A little graphic thumbs up. Perfect. All right. I'll give it one more minute just so people really have it. And if you've got pen and paper and you're doing that, awesome. Just jot down like a sentence or a few words or something. Yes. Thank you. And to kind of like give yourself the focus on it. You know, so, you know, won't go to therapy, or, you know, won't answer the phone when I call, you know, whatever it is. Awesome. I'm seeing a few more thumbs up. Okay. All right. So here's what happens. Your loved one is struggling and you have feelings about it. Totally normal, totally to be expected. And as your feelings get activated, just like for all of us, we tend to go into knee-jerk patterns or ways of responding. And then we aren't always the caregiver that we want to be. We don't always show up in a way that feels really aligned with how we want to show up and support our loved one. So my goal in supporting caregivers in this work is to take them from this place where they feel in confusion, they feel in crisis, they feel like everything is a conflict with their loved one, to a place where the caregiver can access feeling calm, no matter how tough the situation is, feeling confident in how they respond, how they move forward, and also feeling connected, both to their loved one, but also to the caregiver they want to be, how they want to be showing up in those really hard moments. So this is my North Star when I work with caregivers, is can I help increase the likelihood that in these tough moments, you can be calm, you can feel confident, and you can get connected to your loved one and to yourself in these moments. So how is this going to help you? It's going to help you bring calm to the conflict. It's going to help make your support more effective. So in EFFT, we have a saying, which is don't do more, do different. And so it's not about you're not doing enough or you need to do more. And often the case, you're already doing so much, that caregivers are burned out and exhausted and overwhelmed. So it's about just tweaking what you're doing so that the support that you're giving feels more effective, and you have less that feeling of banging your head against a wall a little bit, and feeling like the way that you're showing up is in alignment with who you want to be, but also in a way that feels supportive to your loved one, which can be a really tricky thing to figure out. And also to help you reconnect with your loved one, which is really what this is all about, regardless of, what they're struggling with. That the goal I hear from caregivers and loved ones time and time again is, I miss my person. I just want to feel connected to them again. And there's few things that sort of turn that upside down and rock our sense of confidence the way mental health issues, especially eating disorders, can show up and present. So tricky. And so how does this help my loved one? They feel seen and heard when you use these skills and tools. And when you're able to do that, they're more likely to use you as a support to come to you. And then they get to be the benefit of not just your emotional support, your love, your compassion, your understanding, but also your wisdom. When they're more open and receptive to the ways that you can support them, the ways that you can help them, it's like unlocking you as a superpower for them. And it also helps them build their own skills, their own resilience, and their own confidence, which their own struggles, which leads to a decrease in the behaviors that we use to avoid those feelings. When we feel more confident in managing our feelings, that pull towards those behaviors lessens. But in these really tough moments, we feel totally lost, especially when it gets really escalated, it gets really heated. So we need skills, but it's not just skills. It's about having a plan. It's about having a system that you can rely on when you're hijacked, when you're yourself escalated. And so that was really the birthplace of the response roadmap. And this is the 5-step system that I share with caregivers and parents. So we start at the top, which is recognize. And recognize is what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to walk you through what that step 1 looks like today and leave you with those skills. And recognize is really all about what is coming up for me in the moment. And so I think about this as when you're at the mall and you're trying to find the store that you want to go to, you always look for that big X mark that says you are here. Because even if you know where you're going, you want to be calm, you want to be confident, you want to be connected. If we don't know where we're starting, if we don't know where we are, it makes it really hard to figure out, which steps we need to take. So we start with recognize, which is what we're going to dive into today. From there, step 2 is regulate, or how do we get calm in the moment so that we can reconnect with our values, that we can reconnect with the caregiver that we want to be and that we felt like we had access to before things got kind of turned upside down. Step 3 is how do we respond effectively? What do I actually say and what do I actually do in the moment? And then step 4 is refuel. And I talk about this as refueling, and I say you cannot be a caregiver if you have an empty tank. And I don't talk about this as self-care anymore because, caregivers will be the first ones to roll their eyes, or their eyes glaze over, like who has time for self-care? And so it's really a shift into thinking about this as actually refueling, that it's necessary and that it's non-negotiable. And then lastly, step 5 is reflect and repeat. How did it go? What went well? What do I want to do differently? And then how do I keep going and hold the hope? Because I don't have to tell you that this is a marathon followed by 20 marathons. So it's really important to kind of talk about how do you make sure that you're able to show up and do this time and time again with your loved one. So like I said, today is going to be all about recognize. What comes up for you when we're in these moments of conflict or crisis? So when I say recognize, what I'm talking about is the ability to pay attention to our body's alarm system, which is our emotions or our feelings. So I want to help caregivers really start by increasing your awareness of your own feelings. I want you to notice what's happening for you when your loved one is struggling. And if you're someone that's like, ugh, feelings, why? That's, yeah, I don't want to deal with that, right? Like, sounds like something my own husband would say, even though he's married to a therapist. I'm going to talk you through why this is important, why this matters, why your emotions matter in this process. So first, emotions are information. So we want to be aware of what you're feeling to get valuable data. So awareness is really key. When we ignore our feelings, when we push them down, we push them away, we miss out on really important information about our experience. Emotions are really sort of our data superhighway, if you will. So there's really, really important information in there if we can key in and pay attention. It also helps us come to ourselves and others with more acceptance. So the more aware we are of our feelings, the better we're able to come to ourselves with compassion. We live in a culture that's taught us to be really critical of our emotions. And this can lead to really more complicated secondary emotions, as they're called in DBT, which leads to less effective emotion processing. So how this can kind of play out is, you have a moment of feeling really frustrated with your loved one, okay? Totally normal, totally to be expected. I would be worried if that didn't happen, or shocked. And so we have these feelings of feeling frustrated, right? And then sometimes we can pile on, well, I shouldn't have gotten frustrated. Why do I do that? Oh, I'm so mad at myself. All this kind of criticism, as opposed to just starting with, of course, I'm going to have moments when I get frustrated. I'm human. So now what, right? So now instead of dealing with just this frustration, we've got all this pile. We've got the frustration and the self-criticism or the judgment that we piled on top of this. And you've probably seen this play out with your loved one, which is also why these skills are so important, of having a moment where, I had a really hard day and I engaged in a behavior, and then now I'm being really critical of myself. And then we've got this much sort of weighing on our shoulders, right? And so the more that we can just be aware of our feelings, accept our feelings, we stay out of those kind of secondary emotions that just make it harder. It also gives you better control over your behavior. So the more aware you are of your feelings, it's easier to stay in the driver's seat of your behavior. So our emotions can kind of take the wheel or take over when they're outside of our awareness. When we know them, when we're aware of what's happening, it's much less likely to happen. It also helps you know what you need. So when you're aware of your feelings, you have a better sense of what you need to take care of yourself. So we need to know what we're feeling to accurately know what we need to help ourselves. When you're angry, you might need to vent or set a boundary. When you're sad, you might need comfort, right? So it's really important to know the difference of what you're feeling to figure out what you need next to take care of yourself, to get your own needs met. And again, we see this so often play out with your loved ones that are struggling, I don't really know how I'm feeling, so I don't know what I need. I don't know what coping skill to use because I don't know what feeling I'm trying to manage. And so the better you get at this, you're also modeling that for them, which is the next reason it's so important, because they're watching you. They are in system with you. They are absorbing what you're doing. So being aware of your feelings will help you better model the emotion skills for your loved one. And this really gets into some of the interpersonal neurobiology that we know, the wiring that happens with you and your loved one, which is why this is so important to teach this to caregivers. Because what happens, especially with two people that have been through an attachment process, is we co-regulate. And so when you can be calm, they can be more calm. When you get more escalated, they get more escalated. And you can think about how this plays out in so many situations. It's almost like that feeling of panic that can be contagious, or, your partner snaps at you and you kind of snap back and then they snap back, and right, very quickly we're here. And so we are very much with the mirror neurons and the way that we're wired emotionally, we are really connected to one another. So seeing your willingness to learn and try new skills of handling your emotions can also be really empowering and really validating for your loved one. I hear all the time from clients I work with of like, oh, it's not just me. Like everybody has to learn this stuff. Everyone has to figure out emotion regulation skills. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And so it can make them feel less alone, and that you're going through it too, and you're learning. So if you want them to use the skills, which I hear again from caregivers all the time, like, oh, why aren't they using their coping skills? One of the great ways you can do it is to be modeling this for them. And lastly, because you deserve support too. Being aware of your feelings helps you get the help that you deserve as a caregiver. Supporting a loved one that's struggling is hard, and it is impossible to do it, whatever it looks like for you, alone. So knowing what you're feeling, being able to come to yourself with compassion can make it easier to ask for the help that you need to get the support that you deserve in this. So you get it. I've covered all the bases. You're a big believer in understanding emotions now. How do you do it, right? How do you actually operationalize this? So we're going to go one step at a time. So step one, recognize we're right at the top still. We're going to look at the top of the iceberg. And this is all about what comes up for you in the moment. So recognize that first step is really a two-part process. And I think of it as like an iceberg because we've got the top part, which sticks out of the water and sort of flags us down. This is sort of the neon sign that says like, hey, something is happening here. It sticks up out of the water. And then the second part, which we'll get to in a moment, is really understanding where those feelings are coming from, where the depth of those feelings is. So we've got to be aware because that's the information we're going to get first is what's sticking out of the water. But we also need to really understand how big is this iceberg? How deep does it go so that we can navigate around it? So the top of the iceberg, I'm going to give you guys 3 ways to really be aware of recognizing your emotions in the moment, top of the iceberg. And you can see I love an alliteration. So obviously everything is all ends here. So the 3 skills, and we'll go through each of them, is nervous system, which is really talking about body cues, narrative, which is all about noticing your thoughts, and name. Can you label your feelings? Can we find words for this? So when we talk about your nervous system, I'm talking about body cues, that we experience emotions in our body first. It's actually why we call them feelings, because we feel them in sensations, right? So every feeling has a bodily felt sense. And actually the place where we process emotions is this much older part of our brain down here near the spinal cord. It's not in this newer part of our brain, this executive functioning, this rational, logical part. We get this data and this information much more quickly because it's in this lower part of our brain. So really important to pay attention what's happening sort of neck down, if you will. So take a moment and try this. Check in with yourself right now. What sensations are you feeling right now in your body? And are there any emotions that might connect with? So as you're sitting here right now, are you feeling relaxed? Are your shoulders kind of down? Do your muscles feel sort of heavy? Do you feel like a weight in your seat? And you've got that kind of sense and your heart rate is sort of calm. You're feeling that kind of mellow feeling in your body, Compare that to if you imagine being in the throes of a huge fight, right? All of a sudden your chest gets hot, your heart starts beating, your shoulders go back, your muscles in your back sort of start to tighten, your wrists get clammy. Really different experience in your body, right? So just take a second and check in. What do you notice? What do you notice about how your skin feels? What do you notice about your muscles? How shallow is your breath? How quick is your heart beating? What information is that giving you? And take a moment and think about what sensations do you notice when your loved one does that behavior, that thing, that conversation that you wrote down at the top of your paper. So take a second and really try to, in your mind's eye, in your imagination, put yourself in that moment that's really tough with your loved one. What do you notice in your body? How does it shift things? What feels different? And this is really important because this is going to be the first piece of data. You're going to get this information much more quickly than anything else. And so when you can start to notice, okay, my heart's racing and all of a sudden I feel like I'm sort of drowning, or I feel like this tension, okay, what's happening for me? Time out. What's going on? What's happening in this moment, right? So it's like this big red flag. So take a moment and just jot down anything you notice in your body. And if you're having a hard time pulling it up, that's okay. Make a mental note to yourself of next time you're in one of these tough situations with your loved one to check in, kind of neck down, what's happening. So another way that you can kind of check in with how you're feeling is noticing your thoughts. And I think about this as narrative, because it's like asking yourself this question, what is the story my brain is telling me? And being aware of your thoughts can help you figure out what you're feeling, right? And it can really indicate to us, like, what's the bigger story? What's the theme that my brain is putting together, right? So the body sensations are like pretty immediate, almost kind of like surface level, if you will. The narrative is how this part of our brain starts to weave these things together. So I'll give you an example. I have a 3-year-old and he's like deep into our temper tantrum and throwing things and hitting phase. And it's a blast. And I was getting ready to walk out the door today and he just took his shoe off and threw it at me, like totally unprovoked, out of nowhere, just like throws a shoe at me. Right. And so immediately I'm like, I noticed this in my body, right? Where I'm like, oh, like, so, right. I can feel like my jaw tightening. I can feel my hands clenching and I'm like, what the hell? Right. And then immediately my brain goes, what am I doing wrong? What should I be doing differently about my parenting of him, that he's throwing shoes at me? And it happens so quickly in my body first. And then my brain goes right into this story that it loves to tell me, which is there's a right way and a wrong way. And if you could just do all the quote right things, then he wouldn't be throwing shoes or he wouldn't ever hit his brother or anything like that. Now, I rationally know that's not true, but it's amazing how quickly that story shows up and how that can kind of get me into this place of feeling a lot of shame and self-blame, like really quickly. And this all happens in the millisecond that it takes him to throw his shoe off and throw it at me, right? So what's the story my brain is telling me? What's the narrative that my brain is putting together about this? So when my loved one does this thing that's really hard or really challenging, my brain starts saying, and see if anything comes up. Is there any story you're telling myself? Well, they do this because of that. If I had just X, then Y wouldn't be happening. It doesn't mean it's true. It's just where your brain is going. What is the story that your brain is piecing together with all of this information? And take a second and see if you can, as you put yourself in that situation, if anything comes up. And just make a few notes of it. And again, if it's not coming to you right now, mental note, as you get into this situation, the next time you're in a moment of conflict, even outside of your loved one, just really starting to pay attention. What are the thoughts I'm having? And if you line all those thoughts up together, is there a theme? Is there a story? If we had to call this the X section of the library, what would this be? And it can give us a lot of information about how our brain is sort of sorting some of this information. And then lastly, name the emotion. And this kind of gets into this idea of the power of emotional granularity, which is just a fancy way of saying that the larger our vocabulary is to describe our feelings, the better emotion regulation skills we have. That there's actually a ton of really cool benefits that we see when we really work on kind of widening our vocabulary. They did a study recently, and I think most people can name like 4 emotions, we're like mad, sad, glad, annoyed, or something like that. And so if you're like, oh, I don't have a lot of words for feelings, that's okay. You are in good company there. But take a moment. What are a few really specific words that can describe, either your current emotions or the emotions that come up in this tough situation with your loved one? Do you get annoyed? Do you get irritated? Do you get frustrated? Do you get angry? Do you get livid? And how those are all actually different, right? So one of the great ways that we can do this is good old-fashioned feelings wheel. So let's say you're in this moment with your loved one, it's really tough, right? okay, I know I'm somewhere in the angry, like when my kid throws the shoe at me, right? Like we're definitely in that red somewhere. Is it humiliated? Is it frustrated? Is it critical? Is it resentful? Is it disrespected? Is it furious? Is it withdrawn or numb? And so these are all over the internet. This is a great one that I've found. But different ways to do this. Brene Brown recently came out with a book called Atlas of the Heart that's all about different types of emotions and sort of distinguishing each emotion and why this language is so important. There's actually a really cool app that is out there called How I Feel that you can download, and it helps you use this like color coordinated thing to figure out how you're feeling and track your emotions. And so lots of different ways to do this. But just sort of start thinking about and being aware of different emotions, different feelings, and different words that we can use. And take a moment when my loved one does this behavior, I feel. And is there anything on there? Is there anything that you can see that resonates a little bit more? This morning with my 3-year-old, I was angry, but I was also critical. I got really critical of him. Like, oh, what's wrong with you that you're doing this, right? This is why I told you in the beginning, I am a deeply imperfect parent and caregiver myself, right? Don't always respond the way that I want to. Why I'm so passionate about this work, because it's so hard and it's so complicated and it's so layered. And we want to do it well so much, right? So taking a moment to look at those, taking a moment to think about what might be activated for you when your loved one really struggles. All right. So there's lots of skills that we could kind of deep dive in there, but I want to make sure I get you guys to this next part and have time to answer a few questions at the end. And so the 2-part process, the second part of Recognize, is going underneath the water. This is where we start to figure out, okay, what is underneath that iceberg? What contributes to those feelings in the moment? Because they don't come totally out of the blue. They don't exist in a vacuum. They're informed by what you've been through. They're informed by who you are. They're informed by your own sense of the world, your own beliefs, right? And so really wanting to have a sense of where those feelings come from that get activated in these really tough moments with your loved one. So again, think of that challenging situation, bring it to the front of your mind. And when you do that, what feelings come up underneath, like bottom of the iceberg? And take a moment and see if any of these resonate with you. Fear, grief, or this sense of loss or sadness, a feeling of helplessness, feeling hopeless, self-blame, shame, and then knowing that all of those feelings get amplified when we're burned out, when we're sick, when we're tired, when we're overwhelmed, when we're overworked, when we haven't been taking care of ourselves, when we're trying to pour from an empty cup, right? And these words are really specifically there and came through EFFT from working with hundreds of caregivers that articulated how these feelings showed up for them when their loved ones were struggling with mental health issues. Again, specifically eating disorders, the fear and how big that is, the grief of what they've lost, of what their loved ones have lost, the feelings of helplessness when we stand by and watch a loved one struggle, the hopelessness that can get activated in those really, really tough moments, the stories of self-blame that we tell ourselves, or the self-blame that we feel, that gets activated from other providers, from the culture we live in. I like to think that as a field, we've done a better job of moving away from blaming caregivers, but there is still so much work to be done. And honestly, even if we could completely stop anyone blaming caregivers, we might still blame ourselves. in working with parents and caregivers over the years, I would say, if a meteor hit my kid's daycare right now, I would blame myself. And I'd be in a room of 100 parents or caregivers, and they would all nod like, yeah, no, I get that. I'd feel the same way, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't make any sense, right? And yet it's where we go so often as parents and caregivers, because we feel like we should be able to protect them. And so self-blame is on there, not because there's any reason for you to blame yourself, but because it's so often something that gets activated for caregivers. And when we don't talk about it, when we don't make space for it and normalize it, it can make it that much harder. It can make it that much trickier to carry. And then the shame that can get activated in the same way. So just take a moment and see if any of these words resonate with you. Again, especially in those moments when you're burned out. And when those feelings take charge, when that fear is at a 9 out of 10, or that hopelessness is at a 9 out of 10, do any of these behaviors sound like ways that you show up sometimes? Do you get overprotective? Or do you get super permissive? Do you have moments of feeling like you accommodate because you're scared of what'll happen if you don't? Or even going to a place of denial. I can't deal with this right now. I can't do this. I can't see this, or avoiding, which we all do in so many different ways, right? Do you ever get critical of your loved one? Like I did of my 3-year-old when he threw that shoe today. Like, oh, what's wrong with you? Right? Not a proud moment, but definitely a place that's deeply connected to a fear that what's going to happen if he doesn't figure out how to manage this, right? Teeny, tiny example. We can get rejecting of our loved one or our support team. We can enable, again, especially when there's a feeling of fear, or you've been feeling helpless, or you're blaming yourself. Other blaming. I am a expert other blamer. If anything is happening with our kids, I will blame my husband so fast it would make your head spin. In fact, I've gotten to the point where when I'm blaming him, I have to stop and say, okay, is this his fault? Or is this because, I'm in a moment of distress? Do you get defensive? And there's so many different ways that these can play out, right? So taking note, are there ways that I get into these knee-jerk patterns, like we talked about in the beginning, this way of responding that afterwards I'm like, oh, shoot, I don't want to be critical. I didn't mean to accommodate. That's not how I wanted to show up tonight, right? And when we see this all together, and this is a beautiful, beautiful graphic from EFFT, that the fear, the grief, the helplessness, the shame, the self-blame, the hopelessness, again, amplified by burnout, really fuels and is the reason that we show up in some of these ways on the top of the tree. And that when we can connect these, we can come to ourselves with a much greater understanding, with a much greater sense of compassion for ourselves. Like, of course, I'm going to accommodate when I'm really gripped by fear. Of course, if I'm feeling like I'm drowning in hopelessness, I'm just going to be in an avoidant place for a little bit. These behaviors, this way of showing up, it's protective in so many ways. And it all happens, it's all connected because you're human and because you love this person that's struggling deeply, and because there's wisdom. There is wisdom in all of this. There should be like a big giant heart, and a light bulb or something like superimposed over this, because there's so much to learn when we can be aware of this happening. When rather than this happening outside of our awareness, we can name it, we can look at it, we can pull it up and say, oh, I know what's going on here. So we call these caregiver blocks. And it's a combination of feelings, thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors that show up when we interact with our loved ones, especially in really tough moments of struggle or stress or distress. And we have blocks because we're human. I know it sucks. I'm sorry. But also because we care deeply. And the more we love them, the greater the fear is. The more we love them, the more frustrating the helplessness is, right? And because there's wisdom. So that part of you that's like, oh, I'm just going to give them, something easy to deal with today because I just, I don't know that they have the bandwidth. There's wisdom in that. It's not wrong, right? It's about doing it with awareness so that it can alert us to our struggles, but also our wisdom. So know that with caregiver blocks, you're not alone. We all have blocks. In fact, I gave a talk to a group of eating disorder dietitians this morning on the East Coast. And we looked at this exact same tree, but through the lens of how does this show up for you as a provider? How does this show up when, you get into a session and you're really accommodating, or if you're avoiding, and so we talk about this not just with caregivers, but we talk about this with clinicians and with providers. We talk about this with individuals. Hey, when your fear gets really activated or when you're in this shame spiral, does it get more likely that you're going to try and other blame, and talking about this with individuals, thinking about how your loved one might be experiencing this. And so when they show up and you see some of the behaviors at the top of the tree, can you pause and ask yourself, what might be underneath that? What of this might be their fear? If they're avoiding, they don't want to go to their therapy appointments anymore. They want to avoid that, right? Is there a fear there? Is there a self-blame? Is there a helplessness, right? And so really coming to your loved one too with this, with a ton of empathy, thinking about how to use this with a co-parent, especially if it's a co-parent where you feel like you're not aligned, you're not on the same page, and they're showing up in all these ways. They're like, oh, why are they doing that? They're undermining treatment or they're undermining our work. Could it be that there's some of these feelings that are happening underneath? And when you think about it that way, does it soften you to approach them a little bit differently? Do you come with a little bit more empathy, a little bit more compassion that can make the conversation easier? So we all have blocks. Now what? Great question. So one of the reasons that this is really important, or 6 of those reasons, is why your feelings matter that we talked about earlier. So it's information. So when you check in with your nervous system, when you listen to what your narrative is in your brain, when you name those feelings, the top of the iceberg, we're getting that information more quickly, right? We can come to ourselves with more acceptance. That thing we talked about the frustration, and then we beat ourselves up, right? If you can come to yourself and say, yeah, I accommodated at dinner last night, and I was terrified. I was really terrified that if I didn't, things were going to get worse. It makes sense that I felt really scared, given how the dinner 3 nights before went. Coming to ourselves with so much more understanding and so much more compassion. We can have better control over our behavior. So when we have those moments where we're up in the tree and we have more awareness of it, there's an opportunity to do something different. When we know that we're in fear, when we know that we're feeling hopeless and helpless, we can take that time out and say, okay, what do I want to do next? And keep yourself in the driver's seat rather than those feelings. When we can name them, when we know what's happening. It also helps you know what you need. If you're in a place of fear, do you need a plan of what happens next? If you're feeling hopeless, do you need some reassurance that there is hope, that things can get better? If you're feeling helpless, do you need a sense of, okay, when this happens, I'm going to do Y, right? So what are the things that are getting activated can really let you know, what do you need? And is that burnout really amplifying things? In which case, okay, how do we refuel, right? How do we take care of ourselves? And as you do this, just like we said, the tree works for caregivers and providers, it's also happening for your loved one. And so if they're watching you manage this and talk through this and be aware of this, it helps them do it too, right? Just like it can, you knowing that it's happening for you can help you bring more empathy to them. And knowing that you deserve support, that these feelings, those words at the bottom of the tree and the roots, the hopelessness and the shame and the self-blame and the fear, these are not easy feelings to carry. These are big, heavy, hard feelings, especially when they are met with the intensity of how much you care about your loved one. You need support. You deserve support. You deserve help. And so whatever that looks like, really sitting down and asking yourself, what's getting in the way of me getting that support that I deserve and I need to? And so that takes us back to the response roadmap. So that first step, recognize. So that's a taste of what that first one kind of looks like. Top of the iceberg with the 3 ends, and then the bottom of the iceberg with the tree. And from there, how do we recognize that these feelings are coming up in this moment? Really quickly regulate with some tools in your toolbox. Figure out how to reconnect with your values in that moment. And this all can happen after we practice this, it happens in like a millisecond. And then respond effectively. What does that look like? How do I come towards my loved one with a ton of validation, a ton of understanding, but also the practical support that they need? How do I really work on that refueling so I'm not as vulnerable to breaking down, on the side of the road like we do when we run out of gas? And then checking in, how did it go and how do I keep going, right? So I want to say thank you. Let me see how much time. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. So on behalf of your loved one, I want to say thank you, because sometimes they don't say it, and sometimes they're not in a place where they're able to thank you. Just you being here tonight, even if you never used another one of these skills, you never thought about this ever again, just showing up tonight is a testament to your love for them. That is huge. And so I always want to say thank you on your loved one's behalf. Sometimes they don't say it. It may take them years to say it. And until they pick up the phone and call you one day and say, oh, thank you so much, I want to say it to you for them. And then just a reminder that good things take time. And just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean that it never will. These are tricky illnesses. Eating disorders can be so devastating and so intractable, and there is always hope. And sometimes the best thing that we can do for our loved one is to do the work to continue to hold the hope, even when that's really hard for them to access. So I love this graphic because it's a reminder to me. So in terms of what's next, and resources for caregivers. So the Eating Disorder Foundation, I run the monthly caregiver skills group. Our next group is this coming Tuesday. So put it in your calendar if you want to, deep dive on some more of these things. And we do it the second Tuesday of each month. It's at 12 p.m. Mountain. So 2 Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And we do 90 minutes, and it's really focused on building skills, moving through different EFFT modules or different parts of the response roadmap. And I would love to have any of you join us in that group. It's a really fantastic group of caregivers. And then some other resources for parents or caregivers of teens and young adults through my coaching. So on my website, and I think we're going to send out some of this information with the recording as well. But I have the first 3 videos of the response roadmap, which is my online course, including a deep dive on the role of the caregiver, why you guys are so important, and building your yardstick, which is all about how do you set up your sense of, am I succeeding? Is it working? And what are the markers of that will help keep you sort of on track? And then I have a free monthly newsletter where I send out a ton of free resources, articles, podcasts, all that good stuff. So if that makes sense for you. And then lastly, the on-demand parent coaching program, the response roadmap. So this is the course that lives online that you can access anytime, anywhere, video modules broken into small, little kind of bite-sized pieces that move you through those 5 steps. And then I'm doing a September cohort. I've got just a couple of spots left. It's a really small group of caregivers where we're moving through the course, and then we're meeting for 6 weeks, starting September 20th for an hour a week. We meet, and then you do the course kind of on your own, that first module, and then we meet back again, do role plays, kind of tailor the work to you and your family. And so a few spots left in that, and also coaching as well. And one of the things that Danny's going to send out with the recording is also a flyer that has all that information and the 20% off code for for EDF families. So that'll get you 20% off on the course, the cohort, anything that you're looking to use. So hopefully get you guys a lot of resources and different things that can kind of help if you are looking to do a deep dive on any of this, since we just sort of scratched the surface. So Danny, I know I only saved about 4 minutes.
No problem. No
I
problem.
always talk too much. But I'll
No,
go
we
ahead.
want to hear from you. So thank you so much. That was so helpful. We're grateful for your time and the amount of energy and passion you have for supporting caregivers. We're so lucky to have you in our community. So thank you so much. We did get a lot of amazing questions. If I don't get to your question, feel free to reach out to me and we can have some conversations. I'll put my email in here. If you want to set up a phone call, I'm happy to dive into some of this with whoever wants to after. But I'll dive right in. So someone wrote a question about an adult daughter saying that she lives far away and won't answer calls and is very infrequent with the texting. So what can this person do to encourage more opportunities for interaction and opportunities to practice these skills that you're talking about when the person is not physically living with you or not responding? Are there any hints or tools that you could recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sort of thinking about what we talked about today, really starting with making space for what comes up for you in the context of thinking about your daughter and feeling so far away and having that limited contact. And, what do you feel in your body when you think about it? What's the narrative? What's the story? I can imagine, your brain might be coming up with a million different stories about why that's happening and what's happened with your relationship and all those kinds of things, that I'm sure can be probably very devastating, and really looking at like, what are the feelings on the bottom that get activated? And so first and foremost, coming to yourself with a ton of compassion and kindness. It is a special, again, because we are so wired to our loved ones, especially our children, even as adults, there is so much pain and heartbreak in that situation. And so coming to yourself with kindness and compassion and love, starting there. And then, okay, how do I take a deep breath? And then really connecting to what are your values? Who do you want to be for your child, adult child? Even though we don't have a lot of contact, right? And sort of settling on what's important to me there. And then how we would move into step 3. And this is something that we talk about in EFFT is something called emotion coaching, but kind of counterintuitive. I wish I had like a whole nother hour to talk to you guys about this. But really starting with, hey, I get why you wouldn't want to talk to me because, and that oftentimes that when we have a loved one that's sort of presenting that they've sort of put this wall up or they've sort of pushed you away, that we start by validating the reasons that they've done that. And validation is not agreement. So it doesn't mean I want you to push me away or I'm glad you pushed me away, but it's just acknowledging that there are reasons from their perspective, that there's distance there. And it's amazing how when we can kind of soften our loved ones and saying, I understand why you don't, want me involved. And I want you to know I'm thinking about you. I love you. And it might take time, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And even communicating those things via text can be really powerful. And how often when our loved ones sort of put this wall up, that so often, and I don't know that this is the case in this particular scenario, but so often, there's a feeling of, are they going to reach out to me still? And so just showing up and just saying, I'm not going anywhere, I'm still here, can be such a great place to start, but I think always coming back to taking care of yourself so that you are able to keep taking the steps towards building that relationship again and sending so much love, because it's so much pain there.
Yeah, thank you. That's so incredibly helpful. Can I ask you one? I know we're just
Yeah.
one
Of course.
So someone wrote in really curious about, with this framework, how do you still set boundaries and if consequences are needed? And I know that's like a huge question. We could do a whole workshop just on boundary setting.
Oh my gosh.
But through this work, boundaries are still necessary. Protecting yourself is still necessary. But if you just have a few words that you can say on some boundary setting.
Absolutely. And that's another reason why it's so important to pay attention to those emotions that we have, because anger is about setting and defending boundaries. And so when you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling really angry with your loved one, it might be a good indicator that boundaries do need to be set. And that actually there's a direct correlation between boundaries and compassion, that the most compassionate people are actually the most boundaried. Because if you feel like you're getting walked all over, or you feel like you're being taken advantage of, even by someone you desperately love, right? It's really hard to hold compassion for them. And so boundaries are a huge part of this, of you need to be able to take care of yourself in order to continue to show up for them, right? And so, yeah, I think it's a big part of, when you feel anger, really use that as an opportunity. Like, is there a boundary that needs to be set here? But also, part of what we work through in step 3 is like respond effectively, is all about, okay, how do I set these limits? How do I set these boundaries? And, how do we intervene in a way that's appropriate given my role, my loved one's age, the severity of the illness that they're struggling with. And so I actually have a whole little like pyramid that I've built out that kind of helps figure out, okay, where are we on this pyramid, in terms of what boundaries I need to set and what limits need to set, or what consequences need to look like. And then again, making space for like, okay, if I set this boundary, I put this consequence in place, is there a fear that gets activated? Is there a worry that comes up? Is there something that gets in the way of being able to do that? Because that can often happen with boundaries too. So yeah, being really aware of especially anger, that's a good indicator, and really kind of unpacking some of that for yourself. So yes, boundaries, and that's a huge part of what allows you to continue to come to your loved one with compassion. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Oh my
Again,
gosh,
thank you all for being here. You will get an email in the next 24, 48 hours with the recording link, as well as those links and things that Bryn shared at the end. But please don't hesitate to reach out to EDF for more information or how to get in touch with Bryn. But thank you all so much for being here, and especially to you, Bryn.
No, thank you guys. Thank you, Danny, and thank all of you. I'm so grateful for your time and energy, and just, sending you all the best.
Thank you.